But uh, speaking of dissuading people from spending time and at least right now money on a movie. DB.
Yes, I did in fact see the Fire Emblem movie, judging by the art style here.
Yeah, the Lord of the Rings, the War of the I can't pronounce this.
War of the Rohirrim.
Rohirrim. Okay. War of the Rohirrim. All right.
Yep. So saw this Friday night. There were about 15 people in the theater with me and my buddy. So I'm going to admit that part of my enjoyment of this was that he was there. We were just whispering like, little roasts to each other as we went through. I hope we didn't disturb anybody because we were having a good time with it.
Yeah.
Also, hey D Rhino.
Hey D Rhino.
So start off. What is War of the Rohirrim? So War of the Rohirrim is basically a $30 million attempt to keep the film rights to Lord of the Rings while Warner Brothers works with Peter Jackson on some other things. And from a cynical perspective, if I'm trying to keep and this is nothing new actually. Probably the most infamous case of this was in the early '90s. A company had the rights to Fantastic Four, and it was about to expire if a movie wasn't produced. But the way that the contract was written, they didn't actually have to release a movie; they just had to produce a movie.
Yeah.
So they brought in. Is it Roger Corman or Robert Corman? Roger Corman.
Roger, yeah.
And they brought in Roger Corman, gave him $1 million, and said, "Make something." And nobody who worked on that movie was in on the gag except for Corman.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who's like the B movie king, like never lost money on a single movie because he just fire and forget, move very quickly, low budget.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This is the closest I think you could do to making a fantasy movie on even remotely the same technical level as a Lord of the Rings movie. Basically, they hired an anime studio. I heard in one video that this parts of it were sent out to it was either 30 or 60 different studios, because this thing was kind of rushed. So on one level, it almost feels wrong that we're basically paying to watch for a $30 million contract extension.
Yeah.
But that's not fair to the movie itself, and some of that are details I only found out after the fact. So let's talk about what the actual experience of the movie was itself. So, War of the Rohirrim is based on a story told in the appendices of Tolkien, and it is basically the origins of how Helm's Deep got its name, because so there was a king of the Riders of Rohan, who are known as the Rohirrim, named Helm Hammerhands, and in the story he had 2 sons who were named and a daughter who was not. And basically what happened was the leader of another kingdom or another, I think it was like a vassal state, showed up and said, "Hey, I want your daughter to marry my son Wolf." Helm said, "Hell no, I have a better offer than that." The 2 of them got into a fight. Helm killed him with 1 punch, and a series of events happened that resulted in Wolf swearing revenge, amassing an army of hill people and mercenaries, and driving Helm and the rest of his people into the fortress at Helm's Deep. In the process, both of Helm's sons died. At one point, Helm was a badass and proceeded. By the way, if you think I'm spoiling the movie, I'm sorry that the appendices are been published for 70 years, so you kind of don't have an excuse.
Yeah.
But Helm was a badass at one point and was outside the walls of the Helm's Deep fortress, buried into the living rock of the mountain itself, and he killed so many of them with his bare hands that the fear of his wraith, aka Ghost, kept the hill people away, unwilling to mount the siege until the Helm's nephew and the riders of Rohan, Gondor came with aid. And although Helm died in that last attempt, he was so well remembered for this that the fortress was renamed to Helm's Deep.
Okay.
Now you might notice that in none of that did I mention a kick-ass redhead daughter warrior woman. That's because of course, she is an original character. So let's talk about the movie as it is told.
Okay.
So Hera, who was the unnamed daughter I mentioned a minute ago in the appendices, the problem with having a character like this is that you have to explain, okay, why didn't Tolkien name her? Like, what kept her from being named? What kept her accomplishments from being mentioned?
Mm-hmm.
And the basic answer is that she was. I was actually joking with my buddy after it. I wouldn't call her a girl boss because girl bosses tend to accomplish things. This is somewhat unfair to the character, but because of how they were kind of constrained by the story in the appendices, she couldn't really save the day. She couldn't really at the end of the day, they couldn't break the siege themselves, and they had to be saved by Gondor and her cousin.
Yeah.
So what the story ends up being, and also, I actually thought about it, and it makes a lot of sense to elevate an unnamed character like her to this role, because we know that Helm Hammerhand and his sons do not survive the siege. So that means that if we're going to have a point of view character / through line, we kind of need someone like her, like somebody who's new.
Yeah. Okay.
Now I say all this because, boy, she is very much in the Captain Marvel style of lead heroine, just much more tolerable. So
she's not a plank of wood.
She
Oh, maybe a little.
Maybe a little. Okay, so I gave the basic outline of the story before. Where she's inserted into it is that she was childhood friends with Wolf, the guy who launches the siege to avenge his father. She very clearly doesn't want to marry anybody, and although her father is of the opinion, no, I'm marrying you off to somebody in Gondor. Gondor's nice. Shut up.
Yeah.
But like when Wolf shows up and offers her his hand, she basically says, no, I don't intend to marry anybody. I don't know if she's meant to be seen as a lesbian or if she just is that independent. She's introduced as, once upon a time, Helm Hammerhand. I believe it was Arwen doing the narration.
Oh, that makes sense.
Once upon a time, there was a warrior woman who was a beautiful. She could ride before she could walk. Like she's basically the bestest ever. Eowyn.
Eowyn. Okay, right.
So she's amazing. She's a great writer. She starts off the movie feeding a shank of meat to one of the giant eagles to foreshadow that they exist and to give them a reason to like her.
Yes, the Deus Ex Eagles.
It's all the Eagles. If they didn't ask the Eagles for help in the first place, they would never be in such a bad situation.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, she gets offered the marriage. She doesn't want to. She doesn't need no man. She's just very cool and competent. Her dad kills the dad of Wolf, and Wolf kind of goes crazy. Wolf in this one is kind of interesting because he is very much like an angry simp, I guess is the way I would put it. Or it's like he's like because he clearly has a thing for her, even though as a child they were having like a mock battle with their little sword and shield, and she sliced his eye,
Oh,
or like gave him a scar across his eye, and he decided to tell her, get out of here before Dad sees that, because of course their dads didn't like each other. So if they found out that
yeah,
that she had done that to him, there might have been trouble. Basically, Wolf is very Wolf is very toxic, but at the same
yeah,
time, you get the impression he does actually care for her, and he mostly goes insane because he watched his dad murdered in front of him, and then he like tried to intervene, and Helm basically picked him up like he was a small puppy and slammed him to the ground.
oh,
That was actually one thing I noticed consistently about Hera, is that she wasn't like successfully fighting off 30 men at once while reading Gloria Steinem poetry to them. Most of her victories were her being clever, her manipulating something in the environment, or it was Wolf. Because Wolf is because like we realized that Wolf. This is a conversation my buddy and I had afterwards. We realized that Wolf never actually wins a single fight against anybody in a straightforward way. Like he is very much like a conniver, a schemer, political manipulator, and so on.
yeah.
Right. Like, yeah, she gets into,
Yeah, her
Ninja brings it
horse.
up. Yeah, he got it. The horse helped her with one of those environmental kills.
Yeah,
Um, and so what I would say again, the biggest handicap to this is that they kind of have to write around her in a way that why don't the songs remember her? Because yeah, it's mostly plausible, I guess, because a lot of what she did was done without somebody else around. And as soon as they save the day, she rides off with her shield maiden nurse, an older woman whose name I forget, who's also an original character.
yeah,
And they basically are planning to go off and go be friends forever, close friends. Like nothing weird there.
yeah.
Um, so Hera herself, like I said, is tolerable but kind of dull. She doesn't have a whole lot of personality, but I can't, like I said, like she's not the classic captain. Like she is on the Carol Danvers scale of 0 being no Carol Danvers and 1 being 1 Carol Danvers. She's like maybe a 0.5 at worst.
Okay.
Um, as far as other characters go, there aren't actually all that many memorable characters. Wolf stands out to me just because he was the one with like the strongest desire, which was, of course, revenge.
Yeah.
Um, but like everyone else is just kind of is mostly forgettable. And I think that kind of sums up a lot of this movie, is that it's largely forgettable. I watched some review streams after I saw this. Like, I would say that um, like a critical drinker was much more negative on this movie than I was. The group over at Film Threat was much more negative on it than I was.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They ripped into this movie really
And
badly. Yeah.
I have to disagree with who is it? Who is that? Meyer Burnett.
Oh, Robert Meyer Burnett.
Robert Meyer Burnett. He made a point that I kind of have to disagree with, which was that he was saying, since the plot of The Lord of the Rings is so apocalyptic, anything else feels underwhelming. I kind of have to disagree, because this is it is sort of a mundane storyline, but it's also it's a storyline with like some historical precedent, like this type of war over like a war turning out or coming out of trifles.
Yeah.
So like I think that there was a way to do this movie a bit better, but I think it was mostly all right. But I will probably forget most of it within like a month or so.
Yeah. And Ninja says the main problem with the film is that the writers didn't develop the side cast enough, and they were completely scared from expanding the source material other than Hera. Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Let's talk about some of the other elements here. The soundtrack is all right, and it lifts quite a bit from the Peter Jackson films.
Mm.
From a visual perspective, like I said, this sort of animated movie is the only way you could possibly get something like the visual style of the Peter Jackson films on this type of budget.
Yeah.
And there are some cool fight sequences. My favorite one was there was a plot line early on where they'd come across the body of a dead mercenary and his rogue Oliphant, who
Uh,
was who was wounded and gone mad. Um, I was really just, and this is part of why you go to the theater sometimes, is the sound mixing on the elephant's roars and rumbles as it was attacking them really just sold the fear of, here's this creature that's bigger than an actual elephant and it's pissed off at you.
yeah.
Um, now, one criticism I will give is that this is supposed to be in keeping with the Lord of the Rings series in terms of what can happen. There are some action sequences where they kind of go. Critical Drinker said Dragon Ball Z. Forgive him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He isn't really an anime fan. Uh, but he definitely got close to My Hero Academia with some of the leaps characters were doing.
Oh. Mm. Mm.
I'll get to Ninja's thoughts in a second. Uh,
Yeah.
and one amusing detail is that there is a scene where they had Helm Hammerhands a fighting a group of orcs who were trying to hunt rings for, oh, we don't know who.
Mm.
But like, oh, they're looking. The boss wants rings for some reason, they say.
Yeah.
So they're out there picking rings off of all of the corpses from the dead hillmen who have been besieging the castle in winter. Um, and he ends up in this fight with an orc. Now, uh, because it's like exaggerated anime proportions, Helm is already like a huge slab of meat.
Yeah.
And he had been on his deathbed in a previous scene. And at first I thought, okay, they were talking about it being the wraith of King Helm. Did he actually die and turn into some sort of super ghost? Because that would be kind of awesome. Because he is fighting hand to hand with an orc who is like 5 times his mass and seems
Oh.
to be doing okay with it.
Yeah.
Okay, snow troll, whatever. They didn't actually say what it was. It was just some sort of big beefy monster.
Yeah.
Um, but and like he's fighting this thing on pretty even terms. Although he does need help in the end, but still, it's just like on a normal human scale thing. Like it would have been like a guy punching a grizzly bear.
Yeah. Mm.
Should have had no impact, no matter how strong Helm is. Uh,
Yeah.
then, funny thing about that snow troll. Uh, so, do you remember back when Batman v Superman came out and people were complaining that their version of Doomsday just looked like a Peter Jackson orc?
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
Somebody at one of the anime studios decided to have fun with that, and that snow troll, I swear, looks like Doomsday because he's got gray skin and he's got like weird jaggedy bits on his elbows and arms and shoulders. I think it's supposed to just be hair, but it definitely looked a lot like Doomsday's spiky bits.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me.
Yep. But as far as other aspects of the visuals, like I said, the visual quality varies. There are a lot of really nice scenes. There are also a lot of scenes that has some very jittery animation, especially crowd shots.
Mm.
Um, I am kind of cursed to notice this thing. My friend didn't, so like I just have an attention to animation detail that would. I've never been tested to see if I'm on the spectrum, but that's a piece of evidence for you that I notice these things so tightly.
Yeah. 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 Well,
In transition,
yeah.
speaking of tightly, okay, so I have to be honest enough to say that maybe part of the reason I give Hera a bit of a pass is because the animators loved Hera. Like, she is objectively hot. If I ever played a Fire Emblem game and she was a character, she would be my waifu in this one. She she has like the camera loves to pan across her thick thighs and ample buttocks, and
Mm.
like she is very much a fan service character. It's
Yeah. Yeah, I believe you mentioned she's built like Rose from
yes,
your books.
yes, exactly. And what I find hilarious is that none of the movie posters have anything that draws attention to this. When like, come on, man, that's like that would be some of your appeal there.
Yeah.
Other amusing little visual things I caught. One brother looked suspiciously like Thor from the Marvel movies,
Mm.
specifically played by Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah.
Um, and her other brother, who is more on the softer side, looked suspiciously like Edward Elric from Full Metal Alchemist. A bit taller, but still, it is.
Yeah, yeah. Ninja says he will fund fan art of Hera for Dini.
Well, whatever artist you fund that with will end up making more money from this than Warner Brothers did, because this
Yeah.
thing tanked like 4 million in the U.S. its opening weekend. I would expect it to do like semi decently in Japan, because I think Lord of the Rings is a bigger property there, and they won't be as turned off by an anime.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of evidence that as much as weeb culture has become a bigger thing in the U.S. in the last few years, I credit Netflix having a decent selection during COVID as a big uh, origin story for that.
Yeah.
I think that it kind of has to be like it has to be an anime that uh, people associate with being an anime.
Hmm. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah.
So it's not you can just make an anime movie of, I don't know, Inspector Gadget and expect American audiences to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, because it's certainly an animation style that the vast majority of people in the United States are not used to seeing.
No, and it's kind of an odd duck too, because like the big fans of Lord of the Rings may not like anime, and big anime fans may not turn out for a Lord of the Ring movie. Like, they keep releasing anime movies pretty often, and aside from the occasional mega hit like My Hero Academia or Dragon Ball or Demon Slayer, very few of them crack the top five.
Yeah.
Um, but again, don't feel too bad for Warner Brothers, because they managed to not only get a property that they'll get to stream and sell physical copies of and rent to Netflix or whatever for the next forever.
Mhm.
Again, $30 million to keep the rights to $1 billion movie franchise is a very small price to pay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was thinking too. When I'm like, oh, 30, they only spent $30 million on it. Well, that's kind of chump change compared to like making a live action Lord of the Rings movie, which could be
Yeah.
in the hundreds of millions.
Oh, thank you for reminding me.
Mm.
Okay, so I have two last thoughts. I can keep going, but I'll keep it down to two last thoughts.
Okay.
One last on the animation. There was legitimately a scene where the Duke that Helm Hammerhand killed was doing hand motions in a meeting, and I seriously thought of Morshu from Legend of Zelda CDI.
Oh.
With his broad hand motions, except that animation was technically more fluid.
Yeah.
There was some weird rotoscoping going on.
Mm.
The other thing that probably hurt this movie is that I mentioned to my dad that I saw this, and he actually couldn't be quite sure if it was an animated movie or not, because apparently the trailers start off with live action footage to kind of ease you into it, and then switch over to showing you the animated sequences, which don't do that. That's just confusing people.
Yeah. 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 I can see where that would be. That's not right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, again, overall decent time. And now I'm finally going to go back to Ninja's thought. He believes that this film will age better in the next 10 years than it currently is thought of, not because of the objective quality, rather than the cultural context will be different. I think that this one definitely uh, is hurt by the fact that we've had so many movies that kind of fit this so-called girl boss template. Because like she really is again, like she's like one of the more tolerable examples. In
Yeah.
2017, I don't think that like if the same movie had come out, I don't think there would have been nearly as much mockery or derision of her.
Yeah.
But people have just kind of gotten tired of, and perhaps whether fairly or unfairly, the audience is never wrong in matters of opinion.
Hmm.
The general collective of the audience, or a large percentage of the audience, has gotten tired of movies like action movies about female characters.
Yeah.
And D-Run
Yeah.
says, tired of all these anime films coming out, anime becoming mainstream is a mistake. Well, the good news is that since this wasn't a huge, resounding success, it may scare away other companies.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think anime is safe for the time being.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Now, changing gears to animation that we wish was more mainstream because they deserve the
Indeed.
attention.
Indeed. Yes. The new episode of Monkey Wrench dropped last week.
Indeed. And just because we like this show and wanted to, as always, do whatever little bit we can to put more eyes on it, we're here to talk about it.
Yes. Yeah. So episode 4 picks up after episode 3, where Shrike and Beebs had taken on some cargo that did some bad stuff to their ship. It was like,
It's like a
oh,
sentient fungus that tried to take
some,
them over.
right, yeah, and Beebs communed with a mushroom god or goddess. I can't remember what it was. And then it just kind of all went away, and and so now they are. So they're still delivering their cargo, but they end up getting stuck in space traffic, basically.
Yep. I do kind of like how non-specific they are with some of the technobabble in this one. Yeah, they don't really describe how the space engines work. They just call the stuff ink. Like, yeah, so can you believe someone tried to put red ink in a blue engine? Come on. Or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so they so while they're waiting, they note that they happen to notice there's a rather large casino
Yes.
nearby, and of course Shrike has a very bad gambling problem.
Shrike is kind of amusing because it's like, what problem doesn't he have when you get down to it? I mean,
It's
I
true.
guess he doesn't seem to be an actual